Hey folks, it's Tankerl here at the Huawei P20 briefing. These are the phones, P20 on the left, P20 Pro on the right, and let me show you a little bit more about them. But before I do, I wanted to give you a quick view of these. The one on the left, the P20, has an IPS panel, 1080p, with a notch at the top, as you can clearly see. You can also remove the notch in software, and at the bottom has a fingerprint reader. The one on the right, the P20 Pro, is an OLED panel and also has a notch and a fingerprint reader on the bottom. So they're both identical resolutions, 1080p, but the difference in size is 5.8 for the regular and 6.1 for the Pro. And again, IPS for the regular and OLED for the Pro. So that's the big difference. Other differences are 4 gigabytes of RAM on the 20, and the 20 Pro has 6 gigabytes of RAM. Both have 128 gigs of storage, I believe, and a Kirin 970 processor on board. So the reason I wanted to put them side by side is so you can see and understand the differences spec-wise. But the big story here is the camera. I'm going to flip them over one by one so you can have a look. And there's no headphone jack, just so you're aware. The P20 is not water resistant, but the P20 Pro has IP67 water protection. So now, as you can see, I've flipped them over and they are similar but quite different. You notice that the P20 on the left here has a dual camera system, where the P20 Pro on the right has a triple camera system, and they're super shiny and reflective. I do like the way the landscape orientation of the branding is here on both of them. The one on the left, the 20, has a black finish, and the one on the right, the 20 Pro, has this kind of rainbowy finish, which is really cool. It starts kind of bluish, turns red. So that's basically what the back look like. And so spec-wise, these cameras are very different, but they have generally the same software features. So the P20 has a similar setup to what we're used to on the Mate 10 Pro and the P10 last year. Basically a monochrome and a color sensor. There's a 20 megapixel monochrome sensor and a 12 megapixel color sensor. The 12 megapixel color sensor has very large pixels, 1.55 microns, with an f/1.8 lens, and the monochrome 20 megapixel sensor has an f/1.6 lens. There is no OIS on this, and we'll get into the details of the reason why for this soon. There's a flash, as you can see. There's also a color temperature sensor and laser autofocus sensor. On the P20 Pro, things get really interesting. You have 3 cameras. The bottom camera here is a 20 megapixel monochrome lens with an f/1.6 aperture and no OIS. The next lens is a 40 megapixel lens, and that is a color sensor. And it is unknown how many, how big the pixels are, but the sensor is a 1/17-inch sensor, which is really big, with an f/1.8 lens in front of it and no OIS. And the final sensor in this cluster here is a telelens. It's an 8 megapixel telelens with OIS and a 3 times optical zoom. Now you're going to say, why no OIS on the main lenses? Why that 40 megapixel RGB sensor on the P20 Pro? This does not seem to make much sense. Well, let me explain to you what they're trying to do here. This is kind of insane. They're doing AI stabilization. So they're using a combination of the optical on the zoom lens plus the electronic stabilization to let you do handheld shots up to 4 seconds that are completely blur free. This is insane, like removing handshake on up to 4-second exposures. Of course, there's all kinds of other advantages to this camera system that we'll get into more once we get a review unit. But this is a complete new approach to imaging, and it's got super slow motion, 960 frames per second. It's got a whole bunch of other features. But the big news here is lots of AI functionality in the camera systems, and again, no OIS except for the zoom lens. The hybrid zoom now that you're familiar from the Mate 10 Pro and the P10 and even other phones before that from Huawei is now capable of a hybrid 5x zoom with very, very good results. I've seen some results. It's pretty impressive. And low light photography on this is supposed to be insanely good due to a whole bunch of computational AI-based systems and this artificial intelligence stabilization system. So there you have it. Now I'm going to walk you through the edges of the phones real quick. So here's a P20 Pro front, as you can see in a bit more detail. You've got the fingerprint reader here, that OLED 1080p 6.1 inch panel. You can see the notch in the top. This is a 24 megapixel f/2.0 camera with 0.9 micron pixels. The verdict is still out on that one. It seems like a very, very small pixel size. I'm not sure if they're binning pixels, but nobody really needs a 24 megapixel selfie cam in my opinion. Weird that the fingerprint reader is in the front. Again, this is the same on both phones, so I'm not going to get into it with the P20. In the back, you've got this really gorgeous fingerprint magnet of a design. Of this kind of, unicorn is what Jess at CNET said, and I think she's right. It's kind of a unicorn. They call it Twilight, but that's the color. It's like a rainbow. And here you can see the camera systems, and maybe in a little closer detail, you can see the Leica branding, flash and color temperature sensor, monochrome lens, 40 megapixel lens, color lens, and the 3x optical zoom lens. Walking you through the edges, on the right hand side you got the volume rocker and this really beautiful red coated power lock key. Nothing else. Then you've got the USB Type-C speakers on the bottom. Of course, there's no headphone jack on this phone, as I mentioned. On the left hand side here you have the SIM slot and micro SD slot, and that's about it. On the top here you've got a remote control IR sensor and secondary mic. So that's basically the lay of the land on these phones, and yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm going to give you a quick close-up of the P20 as well so you can see what the back looks like. Only 2 lenses on this. There's no optical zoom, telephoto. Leica branding, you can see the flash and the color temperature sensor, 12 megapixel RGB lens and 20 megapixel monochrome. So again, this landscape design is really delightful. This is a totally black shiny slab. You can see on top here you've got the secondary microphone but no IR transmitter, and then you've got the volume rocker power lock button on the bottom and micro USB-C and speakers. And then of course on the left hand side is just the SIM slot, micro SD card slot. And here's the display. You can have a look at it. This is an IPS panel this time around, but the same 24 megapixel front-facing camera in the notch, fingerprint reader at the bottom, which is very odd. But look, overall, these are really beautiful phones. I mean, the reality is, we've been waiting a long time for these. They've been rumored in great detail for a long time. I'm excited about the design. Other than that fingerprint reader, I'm really looking forward to trying out those camera features. So stay tuned for more. As soon as I get a review in it, I'll let you know how they fare. P20 and P20 Pro here at the Huawei press event in San Francisco. Stay tuned for more. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like this video, and more importantly, podcast. Subscribe to the podcast, mobiletechpodcast.com. Tell people to subscribe to it. Go there. Cheers.